George Orwell once said, "Those who control the present control the past, and those who control the past control the future." Nowhere is this more true than in Egypt. Today, I will share my shocking experience and my thoughts about a side of Egypt that the media rarely shows. I will also share my views and very interesting insights about the dispute between Ethiopia and Egypt over the precious Nile waters with you. Prepare to have your mind blown. My name is Wayne. Welcome to Plan B Back to Africa. On this channel, I share my knowledge and experience of traveling the African continent and leaving behind Europe to settle on the African continent. And I also share precious insights about business and investment opportunities. I studied cultural anthropology and African studies in Germany, which is why whenever I travel, my background knowledge about history and the socio-political realities get enhanced by the experiences that I make on the ground, and I love to share my knowledge and my experience with you. Now let's dive into today's topic. Egypt, the land of pharaohs, pyramids and temples, and one of the world's most fascinating ancient civilizations. But how much do you really know about Egypt's Black African identity? For decades, the Arab-dominated leadership in modern Egypt, together with the Western mainstream media and Western powers, have controlled the narrative of Egypt's ancient past, erasing its African identity and claiming not just its greatness as their own, but also the precious waters of the River Nile. However, during my time in Upper Egypt, in Aswan to be precise, I witnessed a side of Egypt that they don't want you to know. The people's deep, undeniable Black roots and the people's support for Ethiopia's water dam projects. What's at stake here isn't just history, it's the future of how we see Africa and how we see ourselves, and also how we make use of our own precious resources. When people think of Egypt, they often don't associate it with Africa. And that's because for centuries, mainstream narratives and Western scholars have separated Egypt from its African roots. Imagine in many universities, the Institute for Egyptology is part of the Department for Oriental Studies and not for African Studies. That already says enough. But the truth is, Egypt isn't just in Africa, it's a product of Africa. And that Black African influence is undeniable in its art, in its religion, in its culture, and in its people. Last week, I had an amazing interview with an expert about ancient Ethiopia and its influence on ancient Egyptian civilization and spirituality. And it absolutely blew my mind. I can't wait to share it with you. I will post it in the coming days. Stay tuned. However, I was lucky to study at a university where Egyptology was part of the Institute for African Studies. The historians, Egyptologists, and archaeologists all agree at my institute, and luckily this is a trend that we see in many universities across the globe, that the early ancient Egyptians were heavily influenced by Africans from the south, the Nubians to be precise, as well as ancient Ethiopians. And when we speak about ancient Ethiopia, we are talking about Eritrea, northern Ethiopia, and parts of Sudan. So we are talking about Black people to be precise. In fact, Nubia, located in modern-day Sudan, was home to some of the most powerful kingdoms in African history. And these powerful kingdoms had cultural, religious, and political ties with Egypt. However, what is often downplayed is the strong influence that ancient Ethiopia had on Egyptian civilization, spiritually, politically, culturally, something that I will share with you in the coming episode. So the question is, why is this connection downplayed or outright denied? The truth is that colonialism and Eurocentrism have played a huge role in erasing Egypt's African and Black identity. By separating Egypt from the rest of Africa, colonial powers tried to claim Egypt's achievements as their own, portraying it as a European or Middle Eastern civilization. Today, not only does the Arab-dominated leadership claim ancient Egypt's achievements as their own, but also the source of life that connected all these ancient civilizations, the precious water of the River Nile. During our journey through Egypt, I asked so many guides if the pharaohs knew that the source of the River Nile is in the Ethiopian highlands. And without exception, they all responded by no. How would they know? And I asked myself, how would they know? They were able to build this incredible infrastructure, these pyramids and these temples. And you mean to tell me they didn't know that the source of the River Nile lies in the highlands of Ethiopia? That didn't make any sense. For those who don't know, 80% of the waters that flow into the River Nile come from the Blue Nile, which has its source in the Ethiopian highlands. So basically, all they had to do was follow the River Nile upstream to reach eventually the source of the River Nile. They studied the moon, they studied astrology, mathematics. The truth is, of course, the pharaohs were very well aware that the source of the River Nile lies in the Ethiopian highlands. And thanks to guidance by Ade Getachew, my guest with whom I spoke about the influence that ancient Ethiopian civilization had on ancient Egyptian civilization, turns out that Ethiopia is not just the main source of the Nile waters, but of so much more, and I can't wait to share this with you. However, that's not the topic of today, but for the next episode. What I want to share with you and what blew my mind the most is that the media makes it look like Egyptians oppose Ethiopia's water dam project. When I arrived in Cairo and started to engage in conversations with the local people, it's a very much Arab-dominated society in Lower Egypt, in the Cairo area. However, when they learned that I am from Ethiopia, their response was always the same. What are you doing to our waters? And I was always mind blown about this sense of entitlement. They were speaking of their water. What are you doing to our water? However, once I arrived in Upper Egypt, in Aswan, it was a shocking experience for me because first, I didn't expect to see so many dark-skinned people there. They looked like me. Traveling to Upper Egypt, I spent most of my time in Aswan, and it was one of the most beautiful experiences that I've ever made in my life. I felt like coming home. And the people of Aswan, which are of Nubian descent, and that also explains their darker skin, treated me like a sister coming home. They always told me, sister, welcome home. You are black like us. They don't understand themselves as Arabs, but as black people. I've heard this from so many people. Every time when they said, you are black like me, that was a statement. So they might speak Arabic, but they also speak their Nubian language. And that was also very fascinating to me because their Nubian language had so many similarities to my own mother language, which is Tigrinya, spoken in Eritrea and in northern Ethiopia. However, whenever I spoke to them about the dispute over the Nile waters, they always showed support for Ethiopia. They said, we are with you. There is enough water for everyone. The Egyptian government is building dams left and right. They are displacing Nubian villages. And the biggest displacement ever and destruction of ancient cultural heritage sites was when the government of Egypt, I think it was in the 70s or in the 80s, I'm not sure, when they built the Lake Nasser, which is an artificial lake. And in the course of this, they flooded dozens of Nubian villages. Thousands of Nubian people were displaced, and precious heritage sites, temples, were inundated. Some temples were rescued. An entire temple, I learned, was brought to New York and is exhibited there in one of the museums. But other temples, like the temple of Ramses and Queen Nefertiti, which we also visited, were rescued and brought to a higher platform where you can still visit it. This historical site is in Abu Simbel. Really mind-blowing what these people built. Their ancient civilizations really will keep you breathless and speechless. However, I was really surprised to receive so much support and understanding. And what shocked me was to learn that while they perceive building dams in Ethiopia as a threat and as a declaration of war even, they have used the waters of the Nile to destroy the heritage of the Nubian people, to displace them, to disown them and dispossess them of their ancestral land. So I felt the solidarity between us and between the Nubian people, and not just our connection in terms of our blood, but also of our history, of our culture. So much reminded me on villages in Eritrea and northern Ethiopia. Even the coffee ceremony, it was so beautiful, really. People who travel to Egypt and don't visit Aswan, what are you doing with your life? You cannot tell me you have seen Egypt. You must see this side of Egypt. It will blow your mind. That is the side of Egypt that the media doesn't want to show you, because the Nubian people in Upper Egypt, in Aswan and the villages around Aswan up to Luxor, they still know the history, the true history. And so when I took a Nile River cruise with them, using the Nubian traditional felucca instead of this Nile River cruises, the engine-powered Nile River cruises, I spent so much time with them, soaking in all the knowledge that they shared with me and the painful and traumatic histories of violence that they experienced at the hands of the Arab-dominated leadership. And of course, I also took my time to visit the Aswan High Dam, which is where Egypt built a dam that stores huge amounts of water. And imagine 80% of the water that flows into the Nile through the Aswan Dam comes from the highlands of Ethiopia. And yet, Egypt claims the waters of the River Nile for its own and for its own only. And it's very interesting, their justification for this sense of ownership that they have. They refer to an agreement between the British colonizers, who back then controlled Egypt and Sudan, together with Emperor Menelik II, ruling Ethiopia at that time. And the key points of this 1902 agreement are about the Nile River. Ethiopian Emperor Menelik II agreed to not obstruct the flow of the Nile or its tributaries in a way that would negatively affect the water flow to Sudan and Egypt, which were then under British control. However, Ethiopia rightfully ignored this agreement, since it's a colonial agreement, and started building dams in the last decades, some for the purpose of irrigation, others for hydropower, and this has led to a massive conflict between Ethiopia and Egypt. Egypt feels threatened and always refers to this agreement. Ethiopia has clearly said these times are over and they are over for good, and has even built one of the biggest, if not the biggest, water dam on the African continent, the Grand Renaissance Dam, which was funded without foreign help. People, Ethiopians, contributed to this. It was kind of a crowdfunding project, because the leadership back then knew that if they fund the project themselves, the Western powers cannot interfere. They're trying to do so regardless. I remember vividly how President Donald Trump, when he was president back then, 4 years ago, advised Egypt to bomb the dam. That is what he would do. So he's trying to further escalate the conflict. And we will see how this will play out now that he is back in office. However, there's one thing that I must share with you and that makes me question a lot. In 2012, I conducted a social study at the Koga Dam, which was at that time the biggest water dam project in Ethiopia. And I will never forget the insights that I gained there. And it's very interesting, because 12 years later, visiting Egypt and learning more, I slowly see the bigger picture, and it's absolutely mind-blowing. That is why I need to share this with you. So the Koga Dam project, which I worked in 2012, was an irrigation project for agricultural purposes. The idea behind that was, and that was a project that was funded by Western donors. Their idea was, as you know, they always come with their brilliant ideas and development projects without consulting the people on the ground, without asking them for their opinion. And so their brilliant idea was about creating a water dam that water can be used for irrigation. And so the farmers in that area, and 80% of the Ethiopian societies depend on subsistence farming, are able to farm the whole year through and not just seasonal, because they were depending on seasonal rainfall. And so their mathematics and calculation was that when the people are able to farm the whole year, this will create a surplus in agricultural products that they can sell on the local market, and this will revive the economy and increase the cash flow, and so they can live a better life basically and are less vulnerable to droughts. However, the project failed, and it failed miserably. And the reason why this project failed is very interesting. The region where this project happened and where I did my social study, it was basically an assessment study where I interviewed farmers who were displaced from the ancestral land because of the construction of the dam. And so we basically did a study on how they were coping, and if the project and the irrigational farming has improved their livelihoods. And what I learned there was really shocking to me. They told me that they cannot farm because it's not in alignment with their values and their Christian Orthodox belief. Because imagine, out of the 30 days in a month, over 15 days are Christian Orthodox holidays. You know, every day a different angel, archangel, or saint is being worshipped. So on one day it's the day of Saint Michael, the other day it's of Saint Gabriel, what have you. And on these days, according to the Ethiopian Orthodox Christian customs, they are not allowed to work. They are not allowed to wash their clothes even, talk less of farming. And so irrigation farming requires you and the farmer to be on the field and to open the pipes to allow the water flow onto your plot. However, it was not possible because the farmers, they were so scared. They had so much fear. Farmers told me that the priests are threatening them, that if they decide to farm regardless and work on their plots, that God will punish them. And this is a culture that I also experience in my hometown in Adwa. Whenever it was a Saturday and I decided to wash my clothes, I would hear how my grandmother would say, yeah, it's because of this kind of behavior that we are experiencing bad harvests, that we are experiencing heavy rainfall and even hail. And this is a punishment of God because you have lost your way, you have lost your connection to God, and you don't worship the saints. However, now comes the thing, what I find very interesting. The region where I worked and where I did the social study, and the Koga Dam was built at one of the tributaries. And basically this region is full of rivers who are the tributaries for the Blue Nile and where all the water comes from. This region has the most Christian holidays, the strictest calendar, even though the spiritual center of Christian Orthodox religion lies in the north, in the Tigray region around Aksum. So how is it that the Christian community that is located where the source of the Blue Nile waters is, has a stricter calendar, has more Orthodox Christian holidays than the region that is considered and that is in fact the spiritual center of Ethiopian Orthodox belief? You do the math. And now if you consider that the Egyptian Orthodox Coptic Church had the strongest influence on the Ethiopian Coptic Orthodox Church, what do you think about that? Do you see a connection or not? Because I clearly do. Until the 70s, I believe, Ethiopia didn't even have its own archbishop, but the head of the Ethiopian Coptic Orthodox Church was the Abuna in Egypt, an Egyptian archbishop. And so maybe, just maybe, I'm just saying, the Egyptian Coptic Orthodox Church imposed these strict calendar and customs, Orthodox customs, upon the people to prevent them from making use of the water. I'm just saying, it's just an idea. Because what I also find interesting, when I visited Cairo, I took my time to learn more about the Egyptian Coptic Orthodox belief. I visited Coptic Cairo and educated myself deeply. I talked to many Egyptian Coptic Orthodox Christians, and none of them follows this calendar. They didn't even know about these holidays. When I sailed along the River Nile from Aswan up to Luxor, I saw farmers left and right farming day in, day out. Christian farmers, Muslim farmers. As we know, religion was one of the most powerful tools that the colonizers used to control the people. I'm not saying that Ethiopia was colonized. I'm just saying that there might be a connection, and that the Orthodox belief is being weaponized to control the people in a way that prevents the people from making use of the waters of the River Nile. I know that many Ethiopians now will feel attacked because I get it, whenever you question someone's heritage, it will be perceived as an attack as their very being. That is not my intention. And just for your info, I'm an Orthodox myself, but we need to be able to speak about this and start asking questions, because unfortunately our culture, especially the very strict Ethiopian Orthodox tradition, doesn't like to be questioned. But I seriously want to know, how can we improve our livelihoods? How can we develop our country, build our country, if our customs and religious traditions prevent us from using the waters of the River Nile? I see children every day when I'm in my region carrying jerrycans with 20, 30 liters of water on their back. Jerrycans full of water that are more heavy than the child, carrying these jerrycans for 1 hour, 2 hours up the mountain to their village. When you visit the mountains in northern Ethiopia, I was at that time for my research in the Amhara region, around a small town, Merawi, and I made the same experience in the Tigray region, in the highlands. When the sun goes down, when the sun sets, there is darkness, there is no electricity. Children are not able to study in the evening. 6 o'clock, it's finished, case closed. How can we develop our country? How can we build our country? And we know education is the key. However, we're not making use of the waters of the Nile that can help us to generate electricity, that can help us to supply waters to the communities. But we allow our precious water, 80%, to cross the border and flow into the River Nile. And so the point is, I'm not trying to claim the water, the Nile River waters, for Ethiopians alone. This is God's gift that we must share. I know for a fact that the dams that are being built in Ethiopia, especially the Grand Renaissance Dam, is even of benefit for Sudan and Egypt, because if they experience a drought, Ethiopia can release water that is being stored in the dam to mitigate the effects of droughts, to release water. However, and they are very well aware of the benefits, but you know what this is all about? It's about power, because Ethiopia, once they start making use of their waters and building dams, they hold incredible power over Egypt, because the Nile is the lifeline, is the source of life in the present, and it was like that in the past. And it's also interesting that the dispute over the Nile waters is not a modern conflict. From what I've learned is that there was always tension between Egypt and Ethiopia over the waters of the River Nile. And the Ethiopian emperors in the past, they were very well aware of the power that they hold. For instance, there was one incident, I don't remember which emperor it was. However, that was at a time when the Coptic Orthodox Christians in Egypt were killed, being discriminated, and Islam spread more and more in that region. And the Ethiopian emperor that was ruling Ethiopia at that time didn't like that, because he was a Christian Orthodox himself, and he threatened the Egyptians that if they don't leave the brothers and sisters in faith, the Coptic Egyptian Christians, in peace, they will block the water. This was just one incident. There are other incidents in the past where Ethiopian emperors threatened the Egyptian leaders that they will cut them off their lifeline of the water if they don't do this and that, what have you. So, what do we make out of this? I'm very curious to hear your opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you also believe that religion is being used and being weaponized by the Egyptian Orthodox Church to prevent Ethiopians from making use of the precious Nile waters? I look forward to read your thoughts, and don't forget to tune in the next episode where Ade Getachew will reveal more precious insights about ancient Ethiopia's influence on ancient Egyptian civilization and spirituality. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to see you in the next episode. Bye!